Welcome to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Rose, and this podcast exists to help illuminate the path ahead of you. With expert interviews, clinical pearls, and real client success stories, my intention is to bring you hope for what's possible on this journey and to give you tools and resources to navigate the ups and downs on the road before you. If you find this podcast helpful, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And I have a big request. If you have a minute, can you leave us a 5-star review? And let us know, what did you learn? What did you come away with? Did you leave with that spark of hope? This helps more people like you find the podcast. My mission is to support as many humans as possible on their path to become parent. And by you sharing and subscribing, you're part of that mission too. And I'm so grateful for you for being here. Welcome back to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I am fresh off a family road trip, which is always an adventure. It's so good to get out in nature and unplug. And I definitely have mixed feelings about being back in the real world. And our world is really something right now, between wars and hurricanes and election season. And then you have people telling you to just relax. Oy, it's a lot. And the discussions that I've been having with a lot of my patients and my Brilliant Fertility Program clients are very much centered around fears that are coming up. So I wanted to address this today and also share my upcoming webinar. F the Fear is coming back, in part because we have so much going on in the world, and we have to acknowledge this. We can't just be sitting in this, forced bubble of toxic positivity. Not that you are, but I know that some people feel like they need to be, that they've been told, like, just stay positive, just stay hopeful, just relax and it'll happen. And the reality is that those aren't resources. Those are not very helpful sayings. They don't give us real opportunity to look inward and understand our emotions and have the tools to move through them and be with them and be curious about them. So I want to get into this discussion today about negativity, negative emotions, and in particular, fear. Fear is a most interesting emotion. Well, I think all of them are. I think I should give a little plug for the Inside Out movies here. This is not sponsored, but I think that Inside Out and Inside Out 2 do a really good job of just showing us that emotions themselves are opportunities for learning. And yes, when we get stuck in any one emotion, it can create an imbalance. And this includes even what we would think of as the positive emotions like joy. But we'll start with fear because it's what's coming in hot in my practice. Having conversations with people who are, afraid about every step in their fertility journey. They're afraid of making the wrong decision. They're afraid of, trying so hard to bring a child into this world that has so much conflict right now. Oh my gosh, even as I'm talking about this, is so funny. If you're watching on YouTube, I was just like reflexively kind of putting pressure on this acupuncture point that I use a lot in practice for keeping the heart open. How interesting. We're such intuitive little beings. Anyway, we're having these discussions about fear. Fear, are you doing the right thing? Are you making the right choice? Is your body ready for this? Are you too old? There's so many ways in which these question marks can create a lot of turmoil within our thought processes, and it can make it very challenging to make a decision that feels like it is a decision made out of peace. right? When we're making decisions from a place of fear, we're always going to be second guessing ourselves. We're always going to be playing the what if game. What if I had made a different choice? The shoulda, woulda, couldas. And we don't have control over that, right? We can't go back and change the past. And so it makes the weightiness of those decisions even heavier. But how do we shift out of fear? And how is this fear impacting us? And how do we distinguish between worry, anxiety, fear, and our intuition? There are some big question marks that we'll be getting into today. So, first of all, I want to talk about fear from the traditional Chinese medicine perspective. A lot of you may know that I have a strong background in TCM. I practice acupuncture in my medical practice. My mom is an acupuncturist, fun fact. And so I see a lot of this in practice and how it affects the organs. And in particular, the kidney is the organ meridian that is most impacted by fear. And when it comes to fertility, the kidney is important because it houses the jing, which is considered the seat of reproductive essence. And when we use up the jing, it can't be replaced. Now, I don't tell you that to create more fear of like, oh my God, I'm using up my jing and I'm not going to get any more of it. I tell you that because if we can recognize when we are really using our energy towards something that isn't a good use of our energy, we have an opportunity to turn inward and reevaluate. So if you are noticing there's a lot of fearful thoughts coming up, and maybe you're already going to acupuncture and they've said, oh, your kidney chi is a little low, chi being energy, then, knowing that, I've been spending a lot of time feeling afraid, then we can work on that. And with my work with neurolinguistic programming and hypnosis, there's so much opportunity to go inward with these thoughts, rewire them, learn about where they started, and create a new dynamic. So instead of pushing away, we have this tendency to want to just push the uncomfortable, the negative emotion away. If we don't feel resourced for it, then we will repress, suppress, distract, or act out. If we have the right tools to process the emotion and to be with it, we can actually release it much more quickly, change our state, change our energetic vibration, and start to notice that shift physically as well. Because what happens when we have a fearful thought is, we see this electrical impulse, we feel this electrical impulse go from neuron to neuron. When we have any thought, there's a neuronal communication that happens between the cells in the brain. And eventually that impulse will land outside of the nervous system on a cell that creates a chemical response. So when we're really scared, if we're having that fight or flight moment, what starts to happen is, our blood flow shifts. So it'll shift towards the skeletal muscle. We'll start to feel our heart rate increasing. We'll often start to get a little sweaty. We might have tunnel vision. So literally like how our brain tells our mind and our eyes and our body that like, all right, it's time to flee from this lion, is we have this physiological shift. And if we find ourselves in that state in moments that aren't actually life or death, like we're not actually running from lions, most of us in this world, but maybe we get an email from our boss that we're like, oh my God, I'm just dreading whatever's in this email. Or we're waiting for the results of an egg retrieval and we're just so scared that like those blastocysts didn't develop the way that we hoped that they developed. And whatever that is, when we start to feel that fight or flight sensation occurring in the body, we have an opportunity to get curious and say, what's happening in here? If you go back to the episode about, the 3 characteristics of my most successful patients, you might remember I talk about curiosity. And curiosity is a really important resource to be able to shift out of fear, anxiety, and worry. And this is something that we can use with any emotion that someone deems as negative. And again, I don't really believe that there's any negative emotion, but there are certainly states that we don't want to be dwelling in for too long. We want to be able to fully validate, feel, process, and release or move into another state that is a higher vibrational state, a state that allows for more expansion versus contraction. And that might be another way to think about negative emotions, is not necessarily is it bad or negative, but when I feel this, do I feel contracted, like everything in me wants to protect myself and turn inward? Or do I feel expansive, like literally my chest can open, I can breathe better, my heart feels open, my mind feels more open to possibilities? And that might be this important shift that you notice between something that feels like a more negative state and something that feels like a more positive state. In the Brilliant Fertility Program right now, we have some members who have just been so amazingly vulnerable about their experiences and what sort of fears are coming up. And it's so relatable because some of it is just, it's a fear around releasing attachment to an outcome. And, if we actually allow ourselves to release attachment, is that going to bring about a different result? Or is it just basically saying, like, I'm resigned to this? And like this, like if I give this up, then I'm done. And there's so much understandable fear in letting go and having that change. Like, even I am not one who is known for handling change well. I've come a long way in 20 years, let me tell you, but our brains like things to be the same. Even if it's a known hell, our brain would much prefer the known hell to the unknown. That fear of the unknown can often stop us from making positive changes, even if it's in our highest good. There might be that little part of us that's like, oh, don't do it. Don't do the change thing. And fear is the overriding emotion that comes in there. And that's coming up for a couple of our members right now as well, as we start to change their way of being in their fertility journey. We're also seeing some fear coming up around feeling, like fully allowing themselves to feel other emotions, with anger and grief being the 2 biggest ones that are coming up right now, depending on when you're listening. But it's fall, it's autumn at time of this recording. And what's interesting about the traditional Chinese medicine patterns in fall is that we tend to see this consolidation of energy. Okay, so the leaves are falling to the forest ground, they're composting, it's going inward, it's nourishing the earth. But what else is happening energetically is we tend to see more grief coming through as that lung energy is exposed and able to express more grief. And as that wells up and wants to come to the surface, there can often be a fear of the depth of grief that lives there. And when it comes to fertility and the what we call the disenfranchised grief of this experience, someone wrote quite heart-achingly beautifully about her experience with childhood, or having a loss of her child, that there's a word for a child who has lost their parents, and that is an orphan. And there is a word for someone who has lost their spouse, and that's a widow. But there is no word for a mother who has lost their child. And whether it's, the loss of a child, the loss of a 6-week fetus, the loss of an embryo, or the loss of a dream that you've been holding for years and years, we don't have a great way of expressing this and talking about it in our society. And if we've never been given the resources and the space to be with that grief, to talk about it, and to heal from it, the thought of being allowed to feel that and going inward, that can understandably bring out a lot of fear as well. And someone described it, one of my clients in the Brilliant Fertility program once, as I'm so afraid of how deep this well is that once I look in, I will fall in and I will never be able to climb back out. And so, sure, having some fear around that is really understandable. And we also know that when we give these emotions a full, healthy expression, that it actually allows for so much more freedom on the other side of it. Anger has some similar pieces to that, right? Like the anger that we experience as humans that, isn't given validation, isn't given proper outlets or the right type of resources to match the level of activation that anger can be. We're being told that, it's not ladylike to be angry. It's not safe to be angry, depending on how people were approached in childhood with their emotions. Like expressing anger may not have been something that they were allowed to do. And grief may feel similarly. So when we have these big emotions that we've never been truly allowed to be or feel, the thought of like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid of what it's going to look like for me to get really angry. Someday I'll tell you more about my story with anger and that I have very much come to peace with. And when we can find those parts of ourselves, when we can see them and validate them and fully experience them, it allows for so much more self-love and self-compassion and brings about this harmonization in the body that when we continue to avoid and suppress and repress and just, try to get away from the discomfort of emotions, we will never fully be allowed to heal. And this creates this disconnect in the body. I see this as the body feeling unsafe to be authentic, that the whole being feels unsafe to be authentic. And I believe that when we create safety in the mind and body, this is the most effective way to prepare the body for healthy pregnancy. And part of that safety means feeling safe with all of the emotions and being resourced to validate, feel, express, and release all emotions. When it comes to fear, we're going to dive into this more deeply in this upcoming webinar. F the Fear is coming back. I hosted this webinar last year. And to be honest, I don't know why I didn't keep running it, because we've had such good feedback from it. And it's so important to be able to acknowledge how fear is playing out on the fertility journey and ultimately say, fuck this. Like, I am not going to live my life from a place of fear. I am not going to continue to deplete my energy based on these fearful thoughts, based on what society is telling me, based on this AMH number that really cannot tell me if I can get or stay pregnant. Like, we can't let these things run your life. We can't let you continue to lose sleep over them. So if you are ready to learn how to shift thoughts and learn how to shift your state so that you can feel empowered and take back control on the fertility journey, check out the link in my show notes so that you can join the upcoming webinar. And we'll be diving more into the science of how fear impacts the body, what shifts you can make to come out of fear and come into a state of regulated, empowered peace and like genuine calm, not just like, okay, I'm going to put a calm mask on because I have to go to work, but like actually feeling at peace in your body and with where you might be on your fertility journey right now, so that you can feel empowered to take the right next best step for yourself. We'll be running this a few times this month. So if you don't see a time that works for you, just go ahead and register for it. You'll be sent updates, and we'll make sure that we get real. If we're gonna get really deep in there. I mean, we can clear a lot in a short period of time. One of our members from the last workshop that we did, someone that I hadn't actually known for a while, but I did not know what was going on in their fertility journey, that they'd experienced losses and had been feeling really isolated, reached out that she had no idea how much she had been carrying around. And most of us have had those experiences, right? Where we're almost blind to it. We're not conscious to how we've been carrying something around. But you know, it's so cliche, but when we have one of those like light bulb moments, right? Where someone says something, a thought occurs differently, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's how this has been occurring for me. And I have the power to change that. Those shifts can create such an epic transformation that I don't want you to underestimate the power of what 1 hour of your life can do for you when you set the intention to shift from fear to empowerment. So anyway, that's my plug for the webinar. You are invited to join us, and it's going to be a really interesting party. So I hope to see as many of you there as we can, and let's shift our state and drop the fear and create a more empowering journey. All right, I'm so curious to know what your experience with fear has been, what's coming up for you. We can expand this conversation. And thank you all so much for listening. And if you got something from this episode, if it shifted something for you or helped you realize something, shoot me a DM on Instagram. I love hearing from our listeners. And take a moment to share on your favorite listening platform. Leave us a review. This helps other people find the podcast. It helps people like you learn how to shift out of fear as well on this journey so that you can take your power back.